I can see people are hopping on. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Iris Garcia. I'm a program officer at Akanadi Foundation and a steering committee member of California Criminal Justice Funders Group. I wanna thank you so much for being with us this morning. I really wanna acknowledge that all of us are holding emotion for ourselves and for our loved ones in our community, concerns about health, but also about employment and income for vulnerable people. Our speakers should be able to give us a really quick picture of how things have changed inside California prisons as a result of COVID-19. But I really want to commend you all for coming together in any way we can at this time to learn about and be in solidarity with Transformative In-Prison Workgroup as they lead the change to redirect public dollars from punishment to healing. On this webinar, we're going to learn about TPW, why they exist, what they're doing, and how they're going to win their campaign to get 1% of California corrections budgets into the hands of community. So this is a program of, this webinar is a program of California Criminal Justice Funders Group. We're a community of funders and philanthropists in California who are committed to supporting the movement against policing, criminalization, and incarceration. And one way we do that is to gather our members to learn from movement leaders and from those most impacted by these issues. And more importantly, to move funds and resources to support sustaining the work of these organizations. So we're grateful to learn from movement leaders, and we also really want to be accountable to our learning through really our financial support of this work. Let's see. Oh, I have some housekeeping first to go through. So this is a webinar. I think this is going to be the new way of life for a little bit. So we're going to have to get comfortable. And we still want interaction, right? So we really, we're going to hear from our speakers, but as they present, any questions that you have that arise, please use the Q&A box in the bottom. And either the presenters will either answer the questions as they go, and we'll also have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. And if anyone's having technical issues, there's a separate chat box. And so if you are having any difficulties, you can use that. And Crystal from Northern California Grantmakers should be able to help. And then we're going to follow up with resources after the webinar via email. So now it is my great pleasure to hand the facilitation over to Caitlin Dunkley, who is the Transformative In-Prison Workgroup Coordinator, to get us started.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all, especially during such trying and unprecedented times, to really take a moment to talk about the important work happening, here in our state, pushing for healing, broadly speaking, in California prisons. And I'm going to provide kind of a quick intro here, an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues at the Transformative In-Prison Workgroup's leadership team. We call ourselves the TPW, and so you'll hear that shorthand throughout the call today. And really want to start with an overview of who we are. So, like I said, I'm Caitlin Dunkley. I am the coordinator of the TPW, and the TPW was founded about 4 years ago now. And in the last 2 years, we have grown from a really small group of community-based organizations to now a 40-member statewide membership organization and network and coalition of groups around the state that are providing community-run healing and transformative programs inside of California prisons. And our network has been established to really organize the field of practitioners, of healers, of folks who are doing the frontline work of transformative and healing efforts inside of CDCR. We have a mission statement, which you'll see up on this slide now, and we only have a couple of slides that we're going to be sharing today. Mostly we'll just be speaking and presenting. but this slide is our mission statement, and folks can see that we really are on a mission to ensure that folks living in California prisons have access to meaningful, high-quality programs. And we do that both for the sake of healing and for the sake of accelerating the impact of sentencing reforms and criminal justice reforms towards our North Star goal of decarceration, right? And so the TPW is pushing healing for healing's sake and healing for the sake of decarceration. Before I share a little bit, just because of this really unique moment that we're in with COVID-19, I'm going to share a little bit about what we are thinking there. I want to go over what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be talking about the TPW's formation and our current work and thinking and thought leadership. And we're going to be talking about our campaign, right? So what we assess as this political moment and what we think is the most important and most impactful way to bring about transformational change in the criminal justice system here in California. We're going to start by talking about what is really the importance of community-run programming inside of state prisons. What do those programs look like? Why are they different from CDCR-run programs? And why is organizing CBO programs a particularly unique way to have impact statewide on changing structures of incarceration and shifting from a punitive frame in our state system towards a healing and liberatory frame? We're then going to shift into some of what the TPW has been able to accomplish so far, and then what our vision is moving forward. Yeah. And so we have our sights set on big change, and we have a bold campaign that we are launching that we want to share with you and talk to you about. And we're excited to be able to get into some of the granular details of what we think it's going to take to bring about that sort of change. And so we will go through that together today, and then we saved a lot of time for Q&A to be able to engage with you, who we really see as the folks who are making so much of the movement work that is changing the California and national criminal justice systems. Those changes possible, right? We see so much change happening in sentencing. We see so much change happening in reentry. And we see so much potential for partnership with the folks who are on this webinar and others who are strategically funding this work and thinking about all of the ways that we can bring about long-lasting and sustainable change. And we're here kind of today to talk about the impact of folks who are still in the system, right? And to ensure that our strategies for decarceration don't leave those folks behind. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're so glad that folks are here with us, even if everyone is self-quarantined at home. So I will say a few words about COVID-19, which is on, I'm sure, everyone's mind. We are deeply concerned about the potential of COVID-19 spreading in the state prisons, as are many other people. The role that the TPW is playing at this point, we had an emergency team meeting, leadership team meeting last night. The role that we are playing is we are interfacing with the CDCR directly to be able to inform our members who run programs inside of the latest information. We are also on several different national and local calls about response and prevention. And we're also bringing in some public health experts and partners to be able to talk with, including a group that's local to Oakland but does national work, Human Impact Partners, to be able to really have a grounded and scientific public health approach to what we see as a major crisis, potential crisis in the prisons. And we also hold that the common correctional response is more punishment to anything, is more punishment, more isolation, more separation, And so we're really trying to think together as a team about how to mitigate both the extreme health risk and also to be able to shift away as possible from a further clamping down by the state prison system. And so with that intro, I want to shift us into really hearing from the folks who are on our leadership team. We've got Ella, Ken, and Richard, who in a moment I'll have introduce themselves, to hear about the work that they're running inside of programs and why this work is important. And from there, we'll shift into why on a broad level we need to be investing structurally in healing in prisons, and why healing in prisons is a key strategy for decarceration and criminal justice reform. So maybe, Richard, I'd love to start with you to talk about your work with the Ahimsa Collective, and if you can begin by introducing yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, my name's Richard Cruz. I'm formerly incarcerated. I did 30 years inside of CDCR. I'm now a program manager with the Ahimsa Collective, and we run programs inside trauma-based programs that are under restorative justice. And these programs are basically where we create a space where people could talk about the hardest things any harm they've committed or the harms that have been committed to them. So we go into about 4 different prisons right now, and we have about 12 different groups in those prisons running. And we go in for a full day, and we sit all day long with the guys and talk about the healing stuff that are we take the deep dive into why and the causes that created the pain and the hurt and that created the hurt, that created the harms. We go in and we talk about that, and we share very vulnerably. And so that's where the healing starts to happen. And once that healing starts to happen, and we could see somebody in their pain, then they could start having empathy for others in theirs. And so we go into Valley State, Avenal, SADF, Mill Creek. We're going to start going to CCWF and Soledad. And we go into all those. And this work is really important, and it has to do with decarceration, because I'm evidence that it works. And other people that have went through our groups that are out here, when they come out, we're with them. It's a soft handoff. We meet them and we give them community support. And so that's what's really important. And once they're out here, they don't go back in. They've have come to understand about harm and not doing any harm to anybody else. And so this work is really important inside of there and coming out here into the reentry piece. And so I think that's what's really important about it, and the connection that we have with the guys inside. You were talking about COVID-19, what's really going on in there isn't reported out here. I talked to the guys, and actually in one of the prisons, 2 yards is already locked down. They're telling us everything's fine. And so, we're figuring out ways to still communicate with them, even though our groups are not going to go in, because we don't want to put them at risk of us bringing it to them or them transmitting it to us, however it goes. But we're figuring out ways that we could still be in communication. We're going to start writing letters to them, start doing things that are different, that CDCR cannot control. And so, yeah, and that's who we are right now. And let me hand it over to Ella.
Thanks so much, Richard. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being on the call with us today. My name is Ella Turen, and I'm the California coordinator for the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program, which is based in Philadelphia, but has folks who are doing this work all over the world, actually. And our mission is about transformative education. What we do is we train faculty and community folks to teach college classes inside prisons with college students and incarcerated students in the same classroom for a quarter or a semester. And this is what's really important about the work. We know that education is a pathway towards better self-sustaining life. And if you look at the college programs across the country, they have very low recidivism rates. But what makes our program really unique is the interaction between college students and incarcerated students. That ability to bring people together, to have meaningful conversations, to do work together on a variety of topics. We have classes that are in literature, classes that are in art, classes that are in science, and classes that are looking at issues within the criminal justice system. But that ability to bring people together is what's really crucial and allows all people involved to be transformed and to heal. And the impact of our work is huge across, I said we're international. We have programs in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, and it's growing. We have over 700 trained faculty all over the country and in those areas. And in California, we have over 40 faculty who have been trained. One of our core programs is through Pitzer College, which runs classes out of the California Rehabilitation program. And what's really cool is that those men who are inside taking classes, they actually get Pitzer College credit. So this is the real sort of like tangible benefits to folks participating in these classes, is that they actually get college credit. And once they're outside, they're able to take those credits to continue their education or to add on to other forms of education that they've been working on. So there's not only the impact of the transformation that they get from the interaction and the learning that happens in the classroom, but there are these tangible things that they get to take with them at the end. And I just want to leave you with the story before I pass it on to Ken about what it looks like to say that somebody is transformed by this. When I was teaching an Inside Out class I usually teach in youth prisons, and one of our projects was to have the young people and my college students work on a project together in which they get to put together a workshop and teach that to the rest of the class. And one of the young men came up to me and he was like, "Miss, wait, but that's not possible because I can't be the teacher." And I was like, "No, this is going to be what you get to do. You get to teach us. You get to bring your knowledge to us." And the light bulb that went off in his head about the fact that the possibility was there for him to bring his knowledge to us and not the other way around was tremendous, and something he had never experienced before. So when we talk about healing, there are lots of ways that people can be healed. They can be healed on a spiritual level. They can be healed on an intellectual level as well. And that's the work that we're engaged in. So now I'd love to pass it on to Ken.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you also, Richard. My name is Ken Hartman. I am the prison program specialist for the Catalyst Foundation, which is located in the Antelope Valley, northern Los Angeles County. We run a warm handoff reentry program that basically helps transition folks coming out of prison into getting them connected to the kind of services they need. You know, the last two speakers, I think, are a really good example of the kind of really powerful transformative healing work that all 40 members of the TPW are engaged in, and they're doing it to literally thousands of men and women inside the prisons in California. I sort of have a kind of a slightly different take on it, and I was part of a program called the Honor Yard program at Lancaster, the prison in Lancaster. I served 38 years in prison. I've been out a little over 2 years now. We were lucky to be able to set up a situation where we had a lot of programs available, and we were able to bring in all kinds of healing type work from a variety of different organizations. And I think the thing that we learned about this is we created, I think, what's called technically a therapeutic community, or what we like to say, it was a place where people could do time in a way where they were doing the time wasn't doing them. And we created a situation where people were engaged in programs the kind that Richard and Ella talked about all the time, every day, 7 days a week. People are involved in all kinds of different things. And we believe that those are the kinds of situations that result in actual healing. And we believe that that's how we can lower the unreasonable recidivism rate by helping people be prepared to get out of prison and lead productive, healthy lives when they can become contributing members to society. And I think one of the really important things here to note about the TPW also is, you know, all of us that are involved in this, we all come to this from a variety of different perspectives, but a high percentage of the people involved with the TPW are formerly incarcerated people who are now engaged in the kinds of healing programs, going back into prisons, bringing what they learned while they were in, connecting to organizations on the outside, and now going back in and running programs. And we think that's a great model. And I think it's important also to make a distinction here between what is a community-based organization and what are CDCR programs. So community-based organizations are the kind of things that Richard and Ella and myself and Caitlin and Iris and all of us will be talking about here. They're programs that are based, trauma-informed programs that seek to help people heal, become better than their worst moments, become contributing members of society, deal with the kinds of traumas that happen to them and the kind of traumas they inflicted on other people both. You know, we want to try to create the healing communities so when people get out, they can just do better. CDCR runs programs. The programs tend to be like everything else with the prison system in America. They tend to be punitive based, and they tend to be based on an assumption that something is wrong with the person and we just have to, you know, if we just bang them over the head hard enough, they'll become better. We know from this experiment of the last 25, 30 years of mass incarceration in this country that it didn't work because the recidivism rates got worse and worse. So people didn't get better and get out because they were treated badly. And let's be real about it, hurt people, and healed people help people heal. And then these are kind of like fundamental tenets that all of us believe in the work that we're involved in. So I think fundamentally we believe that we want to have a systematic approach, a systemic approach to changing the culture of prison. We believe that bringing community-based organizations in allows the community to be inside the prisons. The prisons belong to the community. The people inside the prisons are members of the community. And so we see ourselves as a bridge trying to reconnect both sides of this paradigm together so that people inside prison are not stigmatized and treated as less than human. We believe that all people are humans and should be treated like humans, and the programs that we're involved with fundamentally seek to advance that kind of thing. And so with that, I will turn this over back to our esteemed director, Caitlin Dunkley.
I got a promotion just then, director. Thanks, Ken.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone. So here at the TPW, we like to take risks, and I'm about to take one by asking people to try and use the Q&A function of this webinar. And so we want to ask folks a question, a yes or no question, and have people chat into the Q&A, type into the Q&A box. Here's the question. So having listened to Ken and Richard and Ella, we want to ask folks to pause for a moment and answer this question. Do you feel like you are already doing healing work? That could be personal or in your funding work otherwise. So do you think you are already doing healing work? And moving forward, are there ways for you to be more intentional about incorporating healing work into your funding strategies? And so it looks like the Q&A function works. So folks are starting to chat in there, which is terrific. And also folks look like they're chatting in the chat. And so keep it coming in the Q&A, and we'll keep an eye on those as we go. Thank you for participating. All right, so I'm going to build off of what folks have shared already about these individual programs, the change that they're bringing about, what Ken shared about the Honor Yard, otherwise known as Yard A at Lancaster, and shift into why did we form the TPW in the first place? Yeah. And so around 4 years ago, several community-based organizations, I'll just say CBOs for now, got together and realized that they were facing similar challenges in running programs inside of CDCR facilities. Some of the problems they were facing had to do with a lot of difficulty getting clearances and access for formerly incarcerated people to be able to return to the facilities to run programs. It was a big access problem. Most folks were dealing with extreme difficulty in raising funds for their programs because there were very, very limited state funds for these programs, which I'll touch on in a moment. And by and large, the feedback that we hear from the private funding world and philanthropy is that programs inside of prisons should be paid for by the state, should be paid for by public dollars. And of course, there's a mix there, but it has been a structural barrier for CBO programs in California across the board to be able to raise enough private dollars to be able to run their programs. And so a group started to form to say, okay, what if we collectively organize around these particular challenges? And there you go. Thanks, Crystal, so much. So since 4 years ago, we have grown to 40 members. And really in the last 2 years, we've grown exponentially. And what you'll see here on this slide are many of our members. All of these folks are running in prison programs. Some of these folks are major movement leaders in California who are running campaigns around justice reform in one way or another. The types of programs here range from transformative and restorative justice programs, family reunification, arts programs, higher education, gardening programs, etc. It's really the range, right? We don't define, we see no benefit in rigidly defining what healing is or what transformative is, yeah? And so the TPW was formed to collectively organize and collectively bargain, essentially, to the state legislature, to the CDCR, to make sure that more people inside have access to high quality community run programming. And we have had quite a bit of success so far. We have also made it our practice and our value to bring on a leadership team that is majority led by folks who are directly affected by incarceration, meaning they've been incarcerated or their loved ones have been incarcerated. We, at the end of the day, are fundamentally about liberation. We're about liberation, we're about healing. And our North Star goal is decarceration. And we will talk more about that, but we see, as I said earlier, healing is a key strategy for decarceration. And one of the reasons has been touched on. It has to do with recidivism, right? And support coming home. Another is that our programs are the programs that prepare people to go to the parole board and to get found suitable for release. So our programs are what are preparing people to make the case for themselves that they are suitable to come home. And so when we talk about this, this session, Governor Newsom is proposing to move in the direction of closing a prison. Those are the pieces of structural change in the state of California that will be made possible by high quality programs run by communities in prison. And so we really see it as essential that we don't leave behind the folks who are currently incarcerated in our movement strategy here. I'll share a couple other pieces and then turn it over to Ella. We really identify underinvestment, disinvestment in healing as a key problem that we are trying to address. As Ken will share later, the CDCR budget is $12 billion. This year, it is proposed to be over $13 billion. Less than 1/10 of 1% of that money is spent on community-run healing programs. We're talking about tiny amount of money. It's about $11 million out of a $13 billion budget. that communities are fighting over to be able to run their programs. And right now, about half of our members are at risk of closing their programs due to lack of state funding. And so we are stepping into the space as folks who've been directly affected, as folks who are practitioners, to say we are fighting for more funding for these programs, and we are insisting that the state shift its paradigm from purely punitive towards healing, and this is one key strategy. We do fill a unique role in this movement because we're providers. So we're not positioned, we're not on the face political, right? We're not read immediately as abolitionist or activist or even organizers. We are read as providers, and that gives us a level of positional power that is really, I think, strategic and just really powerful if used well and amplified well. What else makes us unique is that we are the folks going in. So across the state, our members are going into every single prison, and we are able to witness what's happening inside and bring that information outside, which leads to more porous institutions and builds at least momentary pockets of cultures of health inside of the facilities. And so I want to pause my piece there and shift both to slide 3, Crystal, and then Ella to you, to start talking a little bit about the different areas of our work.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where the areas in which our work falls, and I'll start with the first two, which is community building and breaking isolation. Before the TPW, if you were an organization that was doing this work, you might have been in partnership with other groups or known that there were other programs that were perhaps in the same facility you were working with doing the work. But really the information and communication around what people were doing was scattered. And that was one of the big goals early on of the TPW, is to bring people together in community to break the isolation of being able to do this work, because this work can get very lonely. And unless you have a group of peers who really get the work and understand why it's important, outside of that, there are not really a lot of other avenues to be able to share both professionally and personally what it means to be doing this, what are the implications, what are strategies, and to also practice self-care amongst each other. So that was one of the big things that brought the TPW together in the first place. And what we did was bring together this leadership team, which myself, Richard, and Ken are part of, to kind of be a core group to help bring information to the table and strategize around what the TPW could be doing. This year, we've introduced a committee structure to have our work happen in a more focused and strategic way. And the 3 committees that we have are the Mobilization and Organizing Committee, the Negotiation and Advocacy Committee, and the Narrative and Communications Committee. And these 3 committees will have ties and do work connected with the campaign that we'll talk about a little bit later, but they will also help shape the work of the TPW strategically long-term going forward. And I think what's really great about the committees is that each of the committees are co-chaired by one of the folks on the leadership team, but they also include folks from our membership. So it's not a structure in which there's only the leadership team, we make all the decisions and everybody else follows. What we're really creating is a collaborative network of organizations who all have a stake in what we do and who all are involved and have a say in how we do this work moving forward. And so that piece of making sure that our members are involved in the committees was a really important piece for us, especially because as Caitlin mentioned, these are the folks who are on the ground, who are going in every day, who have the information at their fingertips. The next piece of what we do is supporting other partners, making sure that when they do their work and they need support or they need to be able to communicate information back out to other folks, that we can be there as an intermediary. We help our members build capacity in whatever way that looks like for them. And we share resources, news, opportunities. We have a listserv in which information flows back to our members. And we also have gatherings, and those have been really important, being able to get people physically together to share information, again, to break the isolation, to strategize, and to have a space for people to give feedback on the work that we're doing and to help us understand what we should be doing moving forward. And one of the things I think that's important about this as well is that, as far as I know, there is no other structure like this in the country. And sometimes we do say, you know, as California goes, the rest of the country goes. But I do think that we're doing some groundbreaking work here by bringing all of these organizations together and really staying true to our word of having them be involved in the work very tangibly. The second piece I'll touch on really quickly is our work around research and communication. Again, we are in direct communication with folks in our legislature, with the CDCR, and with our members. And this really puts us in a unique position because although the CDCR is one unit, many of us know that each facility also operates in their own unique ways. So being able, that was one of the challenges that we found that folks were facing early on doing this work, is the mixed messages that they were receiving based on where they were doing the work. But our ability to really have conversations directly with CDCR means that if there are changes that we can influence, that information that then gets communicated back to the entire system. And that's really valuable for our members to have clarity and to know that there is one place that they can go to get their message across, and that the message can come back. And that's the same thing with our allies in the legislature, to be able to communicate with them effectively, for them to know that we can be a conduit to get information back to our members is really, really valuable. And the last piece I'll mention is this piece about research that we do with higher ed organizations and other research entities. And I think this is going to come in really handy when as we're doing our work around COVID-19, to get really clear information that we share back with our organization. But one of the places that it was already really useful to have this allyship and network was when we were looking at the information that was coming out about CDCR-based work versus CBO-based work. And we were able to start mobilizing and thinking about how we could gather information about the work we as CBOs were doing as a way to augment our ask, our advocacy around getting more funding for our CBO work. Sometimes we all know data matters, information matters, and that is increasingly important to help make the case. And because we have partnerships in all of these places, we're able to mobilize and think about how to effectively get that information. So now I will pass it on to Richard, who will talk a little bit more about our administrative work.
Hello. So our administrative work is administrative advocacy with CDCR. And what that means is like the relationships we have with Secretary Ralph Diaz, who runs CDCR, other people in charge of DAI, Department of Institutional Authority, like all these different entities within CDCR. And we go meet with them once a month or once a quarter. We go meet with these heads, and we talk to them about the issues that our collective is having, whether that be getting inside of prisons, clearance processes, issues of security, like not letting people in, or like treating them very badly. And we could bring this up to the administration, and then they could fix it, and they have a conduit to come through us. And our members have a safety. it's a matter of safety with them also, because some of them are afraid to bring these things up in the institutional level because of retaliation. And so they can come to us and we can bring it up to the administration without that fear of retaliation on that direct person. And so that's our advocacy, is to still build relationships, and there's two of us that are really, me and Amanda are the ones that go up there a lot, and to build this relationship with them and to call them on their lies when they say them. And so it's like this relationship keeps going. We were up there last week or the week before at a budget committee and talking to Ralph Dees and stopping him in the hallway and being like, we were just at the same budget hearing you were at. Let's talk about this. How is this going to support our members? What can we do here? And to keep that relationship going and to keep our faces there with them on a constant basis, and to keep that open line of communication with them. And the thing is, what's unique about having somebody that's formerly incarcerated on this is I've worked with CDCR administration for decades, and I know how they operate inside. And so that is a really unique thing that I can use to benefit our collective. It's like they can't lie to me about what's happening inside. And so it's really good. And I think it's just to continue to build that and to realize that they're in a hierarchy of things that they want to do. It's top down and we're not. So I think just to recognize the power they have and to keep going at that power and to try to take that away from them. That's one of our goals, is not to give CDCR any more power, but to bring it into the people. And so I think building those relationships and advocacy with them will keep that window open for us. And it's working now to where we have an open line already with the governor's office, CDCR administration, if anything happens to any of our members, to call them directly. And so that's one of the things that this advocacy is already working with. And I know I'm going to pass this over now to Ken to talk about legislative advocacy.
Right. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I'll just briefly give you, I'm the co-chair of the Legislative Negotiation and Advocacy Committee, along with Tyee Griffith, who's a wonderful member of the leadership team who couldn't be here today. But just quickly, really operating on, and when I say a shoestring budget, I mean literally a shoestring budget, maybe only one shoestring, not two. So it was tough, but we were able to win two really substantial budget campaigns. In 2018, we managed to get $4 million put into as a permanent line in the budget for the CDCR for what are called innovative grants. And these are the kind of grants that go to community-based organizations. And in 2019, we got an additional $5 million added in permanent funding through the governor's public safety omnibus trailer bill. And this created what's called the California Reentry and Enrichment Care Grant Program. We think this is a really big deal because we managed to move some of the decision-making power out of the CDCR. And probably most importantly, they created a large committee that would decide where the money would go. And we're really excited that 4 members of this 11-member committee are formerly incarcerated people that we're all friends with, and some of them are actually members of the TPW, Romarilyn Ralston, Susan Burton, Erlon Woods, and Adnan Khan, who are all fantastic leaders who are doing just tremendous work in the kind of work that we're talking about. And we're very excited about that. And that takes me into, and if Crystal could put up slide 4, I'd appreciate that. So what are we really talking about here? We've come up with, last year, after we fought this battle to get $5 million out of the $12 billion budget of the CDCR. And the leadership team last year, we sort of sat around together and we said, this is ridiculous. The amount of money is just, it's chump change compared to where the money is really going. And we decided we were going to launch a program to radically change the kind of money that's going into community-based organizations. And we thought 1% of their budget, which we believe they are fundamentally squandering, could go into programs that provide the kind of real healing stuff that we're talking about, all the other programs we're doing. And as you can see on the graphic that's on the screen, that tiny percentage, a lot of that is actually CDCR's programs. And we would like to see this program, this money, and I want to be really clear on something here for everyone who's listening. We're not saying add 1% of the to the budget of CDCR. We're saying take 1% out of their budget permanently and give it to community-based organizations to come inside prisons and do the kind of work that Ella, Richard, and myself have talked about. And again, our fundamental goal is decarceration. And we believe that the way the way to do that ultimately is to starve the beast, and that you got to starve them of money. So we see this as a multi-pronged strategy that will take years. We know that. We know it's the kind of thing that's going to require a lot of long-term effort. And we believe that it's the kind of thing that is going to require a lot of help from our friends in the community of how we be able to do this. And I think that it's an important thing to remember that so this kind of change is the kind of change that's going to be resisted by people for whom the status quo has been very good for them. That's the people who are essentially benefiting off of the prison industrial complex and have for a very long time. And we see this as radically changing the priorities of what goes on inside the prisons. And we think this is the kind of thing that will actually, in the long run, change the prisons from places that are based on punishment and suffering into places that are based on healing and restoration and getting our people healed and ready to come out of prison as fast as possible, and fundamentally downsizing the prison system to something much, much smaller than it is now. So with that, I will turn it over to our fantastic moderator, Iris. And I think Iris has some stuff she's going to talk about now.
Hi all. So I believe that it is time for Q&A. I see you all kind of getting excited and in the chat box and the Q&A and everything. So so I am going to take my privilege to ask my first question, which is really, how can funders support you in this work?
That's a great question, Iris. Thank you so much.
No problem.
So I want to talk a little bit about what our work looks like, and then I'm going to pass it to Richard, who's going to talk about the nuts and bolts of how much that costs. So we have we were able to get support from the Heising Simmons in California Wellness Foundation to have a 2-day convening. So going back to some of the things that I talked about earlier, which was really great because this is where we got to bring folks together to strategize and be our think tank around the 1% campaign. We were able to bring on a new leadership team, and we formed our 3 committees. And this is all on what Ken described as the one shoestring budget, to have this group of 40 people, 2 part-time coordinators really putting in the work to bring all of these different pieces together. And what we've learned is that in order to contend with this power and really bring about true change, we need a robust organizational strategy and campaign budget. And our experience is that to win, we need to raise both C4 and C3 money so we can do our organizing, connecting, and communication work with our network, but also to be able to do the advocacy work that brings about this systemic change. So we want to think with all of you about what that would look like, because we're not only interested in the funding aspect of this, but we are also in it to have as many thought partners as we can who have insight and information on how we can build this work. And some of the questions that you are already asking is making me excited, because I'm like, ooh, these folks are like awesome. They're already on it and they understand what we're trying to get at. So I really appreciate that. And that's kind of on a 2-pronged front. Both funding and thought partnership is the kind of thing that we're looking for. So I'm going to pass it to Richard, who's going to talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty of that.
Yeah, and so this is our ask, like from funders. So we've already raised $100,000 from Hines and Simon, and we need $215,200 more to continue this on. And the reason we need this is we're living in a capitalist society, and we need a wage too to live. Like we all have jobs, and we're doing this on the side. And there's a slide up that shows you where all the money would go. But we want to be able to collaborate and to get together and to hire some statewide organizers that could organize us, and then an advocacy consultant. And we want to have our goal is to have a lobbyist in Sacramento that could actually be there all the time for us and lobbying for us. And we need to get people together. And that's one of the things we got to have these convenings of all of our members so we can collaborate together. And that's where we love to have thought partners at too. So we can figure out how to do this together. And it's not just a 1 year thing. Like this has to be an ongoing, not just 1 year budget, but like multiple years. If we can get people to fund us for multiple years, because these campaigns don't happen in just 1 year, one legislative session. Like we got one little win last year. We need to keep sustain our mobility and keep going forward. And so we want to provide stipends for the leadership teams. We want to have 2 annual convenings, 2 regional and 1 statewide of all of our members. And all these things, and to pay for the travel and transportation, because we have people that are just barely making it paycheck to paycheck, people that are formerly incarcerated, and we don't have the money to travel around, and we have to do very unique things. Like we do a lot of community building to where, let's figure out who lives in the neighborhood, and you could stay at their house while we carpool down to LA, or we just really had to be creative with it. And if we had more in our budget to actually get people there and not have to worry about those things, it would help us out tremendously in the movement. And so that is our ask, is if we can get like $215,200 this year, and then continuing years about $330,000 to continue our movement. That's just to support all the work we have to do in order to try to get the state to take over and to really fund CBOs for what they're worth. But that's our ask, and please contact. And I see some great questions up here I want to answer right now, but I'll wait. So yeah. And you can see on the budget, you can see on the slide what our budget breaks down to. Thank you. And I'll pass it over to, I'm not sure.
Pass it to me.
Okay.
So yeah, now we have time, you guys. We have like 30 minutes to get into some of these questions. Thank you so much for throwing them in the Q&A box. I might ask all the speakers to go ahead and unmute yourself, and I kind of want to just see which questions are really stirring for you. So let's look at Adrienne, who is the coordinator of the California Criminal Justice Funders Group, who is a participant on this webinar. She has about 4 questions there. One is about the working group's systems analysis, and how you really think about radical change to the system, which is kind of related to, this, like you talk about your kind of ultimate goal of decarceration. How do you understand that at a systems level? And how do you talk and deal with the CDCR about it? I mean, I love how you talked about being able to kind of go undercover in a way, right, as system providers, but you have, you have a political lens to which you approach this work. So that's kind of one question. I think there was a funding question that you answered but you didn't really talk about what will happen if TPW does not get funding, which I think might be good to mention. And then there are questions I think that folks have about sharing strategies outside of the TPW. So I'm going to leave it up to you. Why don't you tell me what you would like to prioritize right off the bat?
Thank you so much. So I can quickly take the what happens if TPW isn't funded. And then I'd like to shift maybe into the other folks to respond to. It seems like there's a theme in some of these questions around what's our structural analysis, what kind of collective impact are we trying to have? And that's basically all we talk about at the TPW. So I'd love to spend some time diving a little bit into that. So I think, without funding, we will be unable to move the work ahead. And that's a problem for a few reasons. One is that the work won't happen, but 2 is that this is a political moment where we actually have a real opportunity to do this work. So we built a lot of momentum over the last 2 sessions to be able to make the case for community-run programs, move more resources to community-run programs. We think that Governor Newsom will be amenable to this. And we know that last year, for folks who are kind of have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in prison policy in California will know that an audit was released of CDCR-run rehabilitative programs that was scathing. It said essentially these programs are failing on multiple counts, and that gave us the political moment and momentum to be able to step into that space and say, yes, and community-run programs are absolutely able and capable to fill this gap, to scale up programs with appropriate funding, and to make sure that folks living in all facilities are able to access high-quality trauma-informed program. CDCR does not have trauma-specific treatment, despite the fact that the majority of people living in CDCR have experienced trauma and are experiencing the trauma of incarceration, right? And so folks coming in from the outside are the ones who are able to deliver those types of services. And lack of trauma-informed care is a fundamental barrier to reentry that we need to be, and I think more and more we're taking seriously in this moment, the importance of addressing trauma and of healing. And so, one, it would be, of course, hard organizationally to continue the work, but 2, we would miss this opportunity. As there's this sea change in criminal justice or in changing our criminal legal system, we want to not miss the opportunity of centering healing as part of that strategy. And we want to ensure that we're not leaving folks behind in strategies that what we see is we have great strategies around sentencing change, great strategies around reentry, but that we often are missing the folks who are currently incarcerated as a part of that strategy. And that's the space that we're stepping into. So I can pause there, and then Ken, was that a hand?
A quick hand, yes.
Please.
Well, just so looking through some of the questions, there's one question was asked. I think it's a really interesting question. I'd like to answer it and maybe tie it into something else. I don't remember who asked it, but someone asked, like, where the largest portion of the CDCR's budget goes, and it goes to pay for guards. About 75% of the budget pays for guards. That's what it boils down to. And it reminds me, my father was in the Navy for 30 years, and he said, in any government system, you look at the budget to find out what the priorities are. And the budget of the CDCR, like we showed you earlier, what's there to try to help people get better is a microscopic amount compared to the vast billions of dollars that are being spent on guns and bullets and paying exorbitantly high wages to people to stand around and watch people do nothing. And I think where that comes into is our systems analysis, and Caitlin's right, we talk about this constantly, probably ad nauseum sometimes, but I can speak for myself, and I think I am not speaking out of turn with my partners here. I think we fundamentally see that the mass system of mass incarceration is a kind of cancer in our society. I think it's maybe one of the big civil rights causes of the 21st century is figuring out how to unwind this disaster that's been created over the last 30, 40 years. I think we all know all the numbers and everything. It grossly disproportionately impacts people of color. It's become a giant mental health system that it does not design to be a mental health system. It's probably the worst possible place to put people with mental health problems. It disproportionately impacts poor people. So from our perspective, we believe that empowering people like myself and Richard and others who are formerly incarcerated people coming back in to help do the work inside, that just in and of itself is a good thing. But B, I think it also sends the message to people we left behind, there's ways to break out of this cycle, because what the system does is it tells people every day in word and deed, you are not capable of being better than your worst moment. You will always be fundamentally broken and not capable of being a functioning member of society. And we bring in the programs that say that's a lie. That's not true. You can be better than your worst moment. You can be a full functioning human being because you don't need rehabilitation. You are already okay to begin with. All human beings are okay to begin with, right? And I think that's our systems analysis gets around things like that. I think, it's a system designed to oppress people, to break people, and it's been extraordinarily, tragically successful. So that's what we're trying to break, I think.
And can I just add to that, just building off of what my amazing colleagues have said, I think that within our systems analysis is also this understanding of where the power lies within the system. And this is why we've brought the campaign to in the form of legislation, because we could just go ask CDCR for the money. And that is one strategy, looking at where there is. We could just say, hey, CDCR, could you just give us a piece of your budget? But we understand that while they have the power to do that, it's not in their interest to do it. And so the way to do it is to put it into law and to work with our legislators to really make this institutionalized. So we're trying to institutionalize this in ways that will lead to, as we said earlier, the ultimate goal of decarceration. Our programs lead to less people coming back. Our programs lead to people being more successful on the outside. So contributing more money to those initiatives leads eventually to our North Star goal. And so in our structural analysis of looking at what are the best ways in which we can make this impact, it's through the legislature, but it's still being in constant conversation with the CDCR. And at the fundamental base, it's bringing together all of the stakeholders who can help put pressure to make that happen.
Yeah, and to add on to what Ella was saying, there's a question here about how, if at all, are you able to lift up decarceration as a goal in your relationship/conversation with CDCR? So just a couple of weeks ago, we were up at the budget hearing, and the legislator, the assembly, wants CDCR to close 2 prisons by 2024. And so decarceration is a conversation that we're having. Secretary Diaz does not know how to do that. He does not know how to close prisons. And so getting with him and doing that and talking to him about that, like I got up there and I said, well, why don't we talk to the people inside? We're talking about decarceration. These are the people that it's going to be most affected by. Let's talk to them. Let's see how we can do this. And he's being pressured. And so decarceration is a conversation that's coming up to get prisons to close. And it's going to be a slow process. He's worried about his staff. We're worried about the people inside. Like, we want to know what's the best prison to shut down. Let's talk about this. Who's going to be impacted? And so, yes, these conversations are happening. And everybody else says great things about the system analysis and knowing that it's a power and it's a class system that's in process to declass people, to put them at lower levels. And so it's really, that's my system analysis of it. It's a patriarchal thing that's been here for decades, and it's still being applied with this power and to put people down. And so, and to oppress people. And I think that answered all of these questions.
I just want to get to this last one about the sharing lessons and strategies with organizers in other states, so they can kind of replicate your model. Have you guys, I know you guys have been focused on California, but have you been able to do that? And also, I think just to be mindful, some folks maybe are calling in from the phone and can't read the Q&A, so we'll just try to restate those questions too.
Okay, I could answer this. I was actually in New York at the Beyond the Bars, and was sharing our strategy of TPW with groups there, of how we organize and how we go talk to, and they were very interested in it, and they were interested in our model, and I gave them my email, and so yes, we do share this on a national level, and so it's very grassroots, and so having them contact us.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely work that looking into the future, it's a space that we can step into to help replicate across the country, because we're not the only ones facing the issues that we're facing. And if we can provide support for other CBOs in other states to do this work, I think that would be tremendous. Just thinking about the ripple effect that could have, and how if the work that we're doing here is replicated in other states and then replicated nationally. I mean, just thinking in 5 years, what that could do to the criminal justice system writ large is kind of tremendous. So I think that's definitely something, as we've just begun to organize ourselves, we haven't done that in a formal way, but it's certainly something that we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, and I'll just add that we are in conversation with national partners. So we are in conversation with Urban Institute, we're in conversation with Vera, we're in conversation, like I mentioned, with human impact partners and other public health folks and other kind of national criminal justice folks. And I believe there's some national criminal justice funders who are joining us today. And so we're really thinking, you know, we are trying to build a model here in California for what's an infrastructure that we can, a community run infrastructure to promote resourced healing inside of prison that directly impacts decarceration and also supports people when they come home, right? So we see this as a shift and an alternative to incarceration that begins on the inside, yeah? And the power of doing that in a way that can be replicated both in terms of our organizational model and in terms of our advocacy wins, budget and legislative, to be able to talk to other systems about who too are trying to shift away from incarceration as the only solution to harm.
Thank you.
I have
Go ahead, Ken.
I was just going to answer a question that really Amanda asked. That the CDCR tracks recidivism by gender, age, race, but not by those who are participating in programs. Seems like those programs lower recidivism dramatically. Is there some way to get CDCR to start tracking recidivism by those participating in programs? And of course, you know, our first answer would be, of course they don't track recidivism by people who participate in programs, because that's not in their best interest. And I mean, I think there's this is, we get back to this sort of systems analysis. You know, we have to remember that the system of mass incarceration has its own interest, and its own interest is actually lower recidivism doesn't really help keep beds full, let's be honest. So we know that the programs that we bring in actually do lower recidivism. And just as a sort of side note to that, as an organization, we've worked very hard to connect students at colleges in California with programs that are running inside the prisons. And we're doing everything we can to sort of bring people in. I think this is where the kind of an organization like TPW, where we have people committed to being involved in certain things. This is also where we get into the question of how do we fund all this. But you know, right now there are, I believe, 11 CBO programs in Southern California that are being analyzed as a program evaluation that will help demonstrate the effectiveness of the programs. And the CDCR will never do that because the CDCR doesn't really want to do that. Sorry to say. So that one really jumped out. I mean, I was heavily involved in trying to get college students, and there are college students on every college campus I've ever gone into that when you say, hey, would you be interested in doing this? They're like, where do I sign up? I want to do this right now.
That's great. And I'll jump in real quick there. So I want to share a particular piece of advocacy, administrative advocacy that the TPW is involved in, which may seem particularly granular, but I think is really an important example of the power of organizing CBO programs in this way. We were at a quarterly meeting with CDCR, and they shared with us that they were going to run a evaluation or research on CBO programs. And we asked about the research design. Said, what tool are you going to use? You know, what measurement tool, what are the metrics, who designed it, etc. And we asked them to give us a copy. They sent us a copy. It was a tool created by the Texas Christian University called the Criminal Thinking Assessment, which is widely used, but deeply problematic, and included questions like, on a scale from 1 to 5, you know, rate your agreement with a statement that I'm only in prison because of my race, or You know, cops get off easy. Those sorts of questions, like outrageously racially biased questions. And we very quickly were able to mobilize about 10 researchers and experts and our coalition to say, do not use that evaluation to measure our programs. And they backed off of it. And they said that they would involve us in future research design. And we have to fight every quarterly meeting to actually be involved in that research design. And it is still a fight. But they have backed off of using that tool and are now, and we push them to partner with a UC campus to create a design, and that is what they are doing. And so that's an example of being able to show up collectively and activate folks throughout a network to push back on what could have been really problematic evaluation of CBO programs that could have led to a lot of problems, including defunding.
Thank you so much. That's a really helpful example to share. And, you know, kind of, yeah, terrifying. We want them to evaluate, but do we really want them in charge of designing that evaluation? We have a series of questions from our sister Emily. If there are any that jump out at you, feel free. I was thinking maybe the first couple, Ella, you may have some thoughts about her question. In thinking through divest invest strategies, thoughts on higher education and prison programs going through CDCR instead of institutions of higher education. And then the second question, maybe for everyone. So I will say, when the 1% divestment from CDCR is successful, you know, are you thinking about TPW serving as, you know, potentially a pass-through body, convening body to make sure that funding gets from the state into community? We've seen some examples of different, you know, organizations, entities being able to do that. So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll take the first one. Thanks, Emily, for your question about thinking through higher education programs going through the CDCR instead of institutions of higher education. I think the power of the programs being housed in institutions of higher education is that it really makes the students inside feel like they are students on the outside. That sort of psychological connection that they have to something on the outside that is theirs and that they're fully participating in, I think is really powerful. So I don't know in the divest invest strategies if most of the programs that exist would want to move to that model, because I think it would also make them feel like they're losing the agency over their students, because in at least the conversations that I'm in, it's reiterated again and again that we think of the students inside as our students on the outside, and that we provide all of the same resources. And so it's worked pretty well to have CDCR be a partner in this. And they've been willing to be a partner. I mean, it's really interesting how even 5 to 7 years ago, the level of educational programs that were happening inside has radically increased, which is great, because 10 years ago, there was practically nothing here. There was a lot of distance education and that was it. But now you have all these in-person programs, which is fabulous. So I think the model is working fairly well. And what we can do is make sure that it's more seamless, so that when the students get out, I think that one of the things that everybody is struggling with now is students who are getting credit, once they get out, how do they seamlessly enter back into higher ed spaces to make sure that their credits transfer, that they are assimilated into campus culture, that they understand what it means to be a student on a campus if they've been incarcerated for a long time, just to make that process more a smooth process for them is the piece that we can play, and to sort of minimize and mitigate the barriers to their education on the inside. That's also what we're able to do.
Yeah, and I'll take the second part of that question, Ella. So no, we do not want to be a pass-through. We don't want to be in the role of deciding who gets what. That's not how we see it. We see it as providing and helping to create an accountable infrastructure to decide on who gets the grants. We do not want to become and we also do not want to become a part of the CDCR. I think ultimately that would harm our ability to do the kind of things that we want to do. Because at the end of the day, I think all of us would agree, we would like to put the TPW out of business at some level, and then there just is no more CDCR. And we've, you know, disinvested mass incarceration to the point that it's being dealt with in local community level, and people are being helped and healed, and that's where we would like to be. So no, we do not want to be, we just want to keep fighting for more resources, and ultimately we want 100% of their budget to be taken away from them. And yes, we know that's going to be a really long fight, and we know a whole lot of interests are going to fight us on that, and we're aware of that too. So.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump down to Maisha's question at the bottom. She's asking about the disparities in the amount of programs between women's and men's prisons. So, you know, having an interest in the women's facilities. Richard, I know you said you were going to go to CCWF. Yeah, just thinking about what's the disparity there around diversity of programming by geography as well. So any thoughts on that?
So, yeah, women's prisons have been notoriously less providers, less services gone into them. And they've been like harder to get into. The culture at women's prisons is very secretive because of the things that happens behind closed doors in those institutions. And so we tried to get into CCWF for years now, and we finally got our foot in the door with collaborating with Root and Rebound. We got in. And so now we're actually going to start a program in there. But I mean, it's hard to get in there, and they hide what happens in that prison. And they did it in CCWF for years, like what they were doing to the women. And in the society, women are considered less than. And so we have to, like us as an organization, is really focus on what we can bring there. Because it's like everybody thinks about men in prison. Oh, because they got a higher rate of incarceration, or there's more men. But these women need support too. And it's a sad thing in the society. It's a patriarchal society, and everybody takes care of the men. And so, like, what about the women? And so we really uplift that. And yes, we want more programs. We want more providers to go in for the women that are in there. That's just huge. And I think actually most of the people on this call are going into CWF pretty soon, and to see. And I think there's even this was brought up in the last budget meeting about women who've got out of these prisons and are free are still scared to talk about what happened to them in there. And so that's some serious power and some serious hurt and harm that's going on inside there, that if more CBOs were to go inside and more people were to be let in, there would be more transparency, and we could find out what's happening and bring it out to light. And so that's one of my goals, and one of our goals is to get inside there more.
Thank you. So I think we're going to start to wrap it up. I know we have more questions than we were able to answer, and so we will absolutely answer those questions. We'll email all the participants with responses as well as any resources. But I did want to give all of you, each of the panelists, maybe 5 minutes total. So if each of you have, knowing like kind of the questions and engagement that you're getting from this particular audience of funders, and I think there's also, advocates, activists that are also on this call, just any like final couple thoughts you want to leave folks with.
One thought, I just see this question, I want to answer it. I've seen it a couple times about guards and the pushback we're going to get. Yeah. I think how I think about them is they're victims of a system also. And yes, we need to figure this out. And this has come up in other reasons of like, what does it look like for them when these institutions are gone? And how can we get the healing to them? How can we get the healing to them so that they can see people as people also, and people can see them as people? And so that's a huge blockade, and they're fighting for their security also, and to take care of their families. So that's a thought process that is going on with CDCR administration, is like, when this happens, like, what are these people doing? Yeah, you invested in these communities and created these jobs, but where are they going to go after this? And that's part of their responsibility also. It's not just on us, because you created this situation. And so we are having those discussions and trying to figure that out. And they are going to push back because it has to do with them taking care of their family and their money. So yeah, but thank you.
I would say I just want to thank you all again for being on the call with us and hearing, listening to the work, about the work that we do. And one thing I would say is, to me, the work that we do is really powerful because of the network of folks who are involved. I mean, we're as strong as the groups who are part of the collective are. And it's been, as somebody who's been doing this work for like 20 years, this is extraordinary to me that folks are willing to come together to put their power and their passion into action for the collective good, because it doesn't always happen, especially in this space. I've seen some disturbing things around, you know, especially when funding is at the table around the conversation, and how people, because of a scarcity mentality, you know, want to kind of like do their own thing. But we've found such generosity with all of our members, and just a real concern and passion for what is going on, and to be there and stand up for the folks inside and the communities that we represent. So I would just invite you all to, in addition to all of the things that we've talked about, you all have very powerful connections to organizations as well. And so any links that you see that we could be making, we're more than happy and curious and hungry for that information, so that we can make our work that much more powerful. And we just want to appreciate all of the work that you all are doing as well.
Thanks, Ella. Yeah, I just want to say, you know, my background is in organizing. I've been organizing in prison justice campaigns for about 15 years, and I feel very clear that we are onto something here, and that this is a very unique, both political moment and a very unique collaboration and coalition that stands to do a lot of good. And we have more and more folks joining all the time, and I really want to do whatever we can to give the TPW the best shot at trying to transform the way we do prisons in California and the way we do incarceration. And I just have to say, I'm really excited by all of the engagement on this call. You know, we are, we know when we're among allies and when we're among strategists and movement builders, and it is so clear that we are with all of the questions coming through. It's just so exciting to be able to start what feels like a good thought partnership with you all, and excited to be able to follow up on a lot of the questions that have come through. And we just are welcoming folks to reach out to us with more questions. And also we welcome folks to conversations with our leadership team to learn a little bit more about what we're up to in our next steps with the 1% campaign. But also just want to appreciate that the work that you have done in the funding field has made it possible in a lot of ways for us to even be launching a 1% campaign, to have the infrastructure and the buy-in to be able to get this far. And so also want to express a lot of gratitude to the folks on this call. And so I'll turn it to Ken to close things out.
Yeah, so first and foremost, just thank you all very much for attending this. Thank you to Iris and Crystal for helping to make this happen for us. We're deeply appreciative of that. Thank you to my fellow members of the TPW who've been on this panel with me. We do know that it's $130 million, not $13 million. And if we said 13, we apologize. We know it's 130 million. And also, if you want to get in contact with us, it's thetpw.org. Just like that, thetpw.org. Yeah, and the last thing I want to say is this is the time now in our country. You know, there's a real opening in a way to do away with the system of mass incarceration. There's a way to empower people who have been disempowered and abused in some cases for generations. And I think that right now what we're trying to do is we're trying to start dismantling a system that definitely needs to be dismantled. And I think we have the right strategy. And I think it's a strategy of collective action, of empowering people that generally are not empowered, and of taking the collected wisdom of people that in some cases, we've been in rooms where there have been literally like 1,000 years of collected in-prison experience of what's going on inside. And like Richard said earlier, when we're meeting with the leaders of the CDCR, they can't lie to us. And a lot of times they look at us and don't even try to lie to us. They just go, yeah, okay, because we know what really goes on inside. So I think this is a moment where people like yourselves who are in the position to help me make these things happen, and people like us who know what needs to happen, can come together, and we can actually truly and seriously begin to dismantle the system of mass incarceration in the United States. And we can begin right here in California. And like our governor likes to say, you know, California shows the way to the rest of the country. So I think we should show the way on dismantling mass incarceration. Thank you again for your time. We deeply appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our speakers, to Ken, Richard, Caitlin, Ella, to Crystal for holding it down, for all the participants that logged in, and all of your engagement. Like Caitlin said, it's really, it's incredible to see, you know, the thoughtfulness that everyone's bringing to these issues. We didn't hit all the questions. We will send an email with contact information, with more resources about TPW, about the 1% campaign, and any of the questions we didn't get to, or maybe even going a little deeper on some of those questions. You know, for me, one thing I do want to go back to, that half of the members of TPW are really at risk due to lack of funding. I mean, I think as funders, we really need to hear that call too. You know, just a couple more minutes, I do want to say the California Criminal Justice Funders Group has upcoming events. We're launching our funder education series this year, and the first one is about prison abolition. It will be on March 20th. It was going to be a combination webinar and in-person, but guess what? We're gonna see you all on the Zoom again. So please register for that. Join us for that to go deeper on some of these questions about decarceration and abolition, and what it means to hold that as a North Star as we deal with the actual realities of our friends and family inside. And then finally, you know, my last ask, in addition to supporting TPW, this campaign, the individual organizations that are doing this difficult work, really California Criminal Justice Funders Group could also use financial sponsorship so that we can continue doing work like this together, and making sure that all of this work that these folks are doing is seen actually, and really, really visible, and that we can positively support and resource. So, you know, be well, everybody. You know, just sending a bunch of love to every single person who's logged in, and ease of mind and ease of breath. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.